Okay, hi, I'm Ross, KM4HZF. The presentation tonight is going to be some basic general guidelines for installing electrical equipment in vehicles, because every make, year, model is going to be different. I can only give general tips and guidelines. So please, and also I've got a lot of information, so please hold your questions till the end. I'll have my contact information at the end. Feel free to email me at any time, but please hold your questions till the end. Okay, so about me, I am a commercial truck upfitter and equipment mechanic, so I install and repair bodies and equipment on commercial trucks. That's anything from putting a box body on a box truck, body swaps, fixing garbage trucks. But my favorite thing to do is electrical and lighting installations. So this is a walk-around video I took of a truck I did. Everything that's not the truck I installed. That's about a $20,000 upfit right there with all the stuff.
Better or worse? Better.
So got a full federal signal lighting package, toolbox, ladder rack, lift gate, backup camera, the whole works. So that's my favorite thing to do at work. It sure beats crawling around in garbage trucks. Trust me. Okay, so first thing of all, personal safety. You don't want to hurt yourself while doing this. Always wear safety glasses, especially if you're using power tools or you're going under your vehicle. Never, ever, ever go underneath a vehicle that's supported only by a hydraulic jack. You're putting your life in the hands of some quarter-of-a-cent Chinese O-rings. It's unlikely to fall and crush you immediately. What's more likely to happen is it's going to leak down slowly, and then you won't be able to get out, and then you'll be thinking about your death as the car slowly comes and crushes you. So always use jack stands or wooden blocks. Don't use cinder blocks or bricks. They can be crushed. Always work on a hard level surface. You don't want your car rolling away when you jack it up. If you have to, roll up your sleeves, remove watches, jewelry, tie back hair, that kind of stuff. If you're using power tools or you need to work around the engine while it's running. And you're going to see this catchphrase a lot. When in doubt, don't. All right, safety from your vehicle. Never run wiring or install equipment in airbag deployment zones. Modern vehicles have a lot of airbags, so you need to be more careful about that these days. If you're going to take the battery terminals off, always take the negative battery terminal off first and put it back on last. That way, if you're using a wrench and you strike something grounded, you won't arc it out, which hurts more for me because I'm using a $100 snap-on ratchet. Avoid probing and testing unfamiliar wiring and connectors inside the vehicle. You might set off the airbags or freak the computer out, and then you'll have to get it towed and explain to the mechanic very guiltily why your car isn't running. When in doubt, don't. Your vehicle safety from you. Once again, don't probe or test unfamiliar wiring or connectors. As I said, you can set the airbags off or freak the computer out. Same deal, don't unplug connectors or connectors for airbag, engines, or emission sensors. That's the #1 way to lock up your computer. Don't drill holes or put fasteners in anything unless you know what's directly behind it. You might go into the gas tank or some important wiring or control computer. Don't force things in or out. If they're not moving, find out why. If you're trying to take off a piece of paneling and it's not moving, there might be a clip you missed, there might be a hidden screw you missed. You don't want to just rip it out and break your paneling in half. Use the right-ish tool for the job. I mean, like, don't use a hammer to remove paneling. If you want to use a flathead screwdriver, that's fine. Just be within reason when you improvise. Seal up exterior holes with silicone. When in doubt, don't. All right, first off, antenna mounting. You got quite a few options. The most common option is the mag mount. One thing to be careful with mag mounts on modern vehicles is most new cars have side curtain airbags right on top of the doors. So if you run the cable in, don't run it right in on top of the door because that's in your side curtain airbag deployment zone. Yeah, that's real bad. Maybe I could bring an airbag to field day and blow it up. Door trunk lip mount. You can sell a little clip with either an NMO or a UHF mount that you clip to the edge of your trunk or on your door. If you have a roof rack, that's a good option. The best option in terms of grounding and reception is drilling a hole in the middle of your roof and putting an NMO mount. That's the best way to do it, but it's also the most time consuming because you have to take your headliner down, which means you have to take out all your side paneling. And you got to run the wiring, and once again, you got to be careful of airbags and stuff like that. If you have a pickup truck like me, you can put it on your headache rack or your truck bed rails. I've seen antennas mounted on bumpers before. On Jeeps especially, they put them on the rear tailgate door. If you have a big truck or an older vehicle, you can clamp it to your mirror. But no matter where you put it, make sure you have a good ground to the rest of the body and the chassis. So that is my antenna mount on my back rack. I made a little mount and put it on my back rack. It's another angle for it. All right, the next step is mounting your radio. So most importantly, don't mount it in a location that'll distract you or get in the way of driving. If you put it on the dashboard, don't put it in an airbag deployment zone. Articulating mount, there's a bunch of different ones. Some of them come up from underneath the passenger seat, some of them go in the cup holder. Once again, don't mount it in an airbag deployment zone. If you have a radio with a detachable face, which a lot of new radios are, you can put it under your seat and run the wiring up to wherever you want to put the control head. You can put it in your trunk. So on police vehicles, that's where they put their radios. On the transmission hump, if you have a vehicle with bench seats and doesn't have the shifter in the middle, maybe the glove box, I don't see why not. That's where I have mine on an articulating mount. It's just kind of floating in space right where, right above my shifter and in front of my radio. It's just out of the way of the airbag. There's another view of the mount. I got a bunch of those for free from work. So I decided, hey, can I take these? And I was like, sure. So that's bolted to my dashboard, and the wiring runs up inside the dashboard, out through the firewall, and to the power and to the antenna. All right, getting power. You have three options for getting power. You can go to the battery terminal, you can do a fuse tap, or you can use a cigarette lighter, which is tacky. So with the battery, you go to the terminals. Depending on what kind of vehicle you have, you might need to get new terminals. Most vehicles have a lead post with a clamp type. And oftentimes you won't have a stud on them that you can attach a ring terminal to, but sometimes you will. If you have a GM vehicle and you have those stupid side terminals, those are threaded. You can unscrew it and put a ring terminal on it and screw it back in. But most importantly, all installed devices must have a properly sized fuse or circuit breaker as close to the power supply as possible. So on my truck, I installed an auxiliary fuse panel connected to a solenoid, which is connected to an ignition fuse. So when I turn the ignition on, the solenoid activates, which goes from a circuit breaker on the battery to that fuse panel right there. The one on the left is for my radio, and the three other wires are for my lighting. That's another angle of it. It's right in my, right behind the grill. Maybe in the future I'll put it in a less weather-prone location. Well, yeah. Use dielectric grease when you're putting together terminals, especially if it's on your battery or exposed to the weather, like in my case. All right, so tapping a fuse. So I brought a fuse panel here, but first of all, you have to determine your fuse type. On the next slide, I have a chart. You got to decide between a battery and an ignition fuse. You can use either an add-a circuit or a fuse tap and an inline fuse holder. I also have pictures of those on another slide. And if using a tap the power leg of the fuse, not the load side of the fuse, and you can determine that by taking the fuse out and using the test light, which I have a fuse panel right here. And I have a test light. So to determine between battery and ignition, so if you get your test light and you touch it to a fuse and it lights up. When the vehicle is off, that means it's battery. If it does not light up, that means it's an ignition fuse or something else. So let's say this other wire connected to the power supply is me turning the key. And now when I touch that same fuse, oh, I guess that one wasn't connected, it lights up. And the way, as I said, to determine which is the power leg, you pull the fuse out, and you stick it in each hole, and whichever one lights up, that's your power leg, and whichever one does not, that's the load leg going to whatever the fuse is for. Only tap non-critical circuits, either on the lid of your fuse panel or in your owner's manual. It'll tell you what each fuse is for. If it says something like fuel pump sending unit, engine control module, airbag module, don't tap off of that. If it's something like lights or the windshield wipers or the radio, that's fine. And if you're adding another circuit, don't tap off more amps than what the original fuse was, because the wiring inside the fuse panel is only rated for so much. So here's a chart on the different kinds of fuses. Probably nowadays the most common are the mini fuse, the low profile mini fuse, and the micro 2 fuse, which I hate because they're terrible to tap. And if you have a GM or a Ford vehicle, you're probably going to have the micro 2 and the micro 3, which is a 3-legged fuse. If you have a Japanese vehicle, you probably have the mini fuse. And in a pinch, you can use a mini fuse in a low-profile mini fuse slot. I doubt you have maxi fuses or ATOs. Maxi fuses are about that big. All right, that's what I was talking about. The thing on the top is an ADA circuit. So the way it works, it has 2 fuse slots in it and 2 fuse legs. So you take out the fuse that's in the vehicle already, and you put it in the bottom of the ADA circuit, and then on the top you can add a fuse for whatever you want to add, and it has a wire with a butt connector that you can crimp on the wiring for whatever device. So as I said, the way it works is you just unplug the fuse from the fuse panel, and you plug it into that spot, and it maintains the circuit that was already there, and it gives you another circuit. That's why it's called an ADA circuit. The item on the top is an inline fuse holder. It's literally just a piece of wire with a block to hold the fuse. And unfortunately, I couldn't bring one, but a fuse tap is literally just a tiny piece of brass that hooks under the leg of a fuse and has a spade terminal sticking off. So when you stick the fuse back in, you got a little tiny spade terminal you can stick one of these on. So in my truck, it's hard to see. I have a weird fuse panel that goes in at an angle and then you take it out. But you can see the ADA circuit right there. And one of those goes to the activation on my solenoid for my auxiliary fuse panel. And that's the wiring coming out of the fuse panel for the stuff I added. What I like to do is get a pair of diagonal cutters and just cut a little V in the edge where the top and bottom match, and then run the wiring out there in loom and crush it together. All right, running wiring. Whenever possible, try and follow the factory wiring. Make connections with heat shrink butt connectors or solder and heat shrink. Don't use wire nuts. And even worse, don't just twist them together and put tape over it. Always use a proper gauge stranded copper wire. No solid house wire. And avoid copper-clad aluminum wire, which is very common on Amazon. So if you see like 10 rolls of wire for a really cheap price, it's probably copper-clad aluminum. Run wiring away from moving parts, like don't zip tie it to your drive shaft. Hot areas, like don't run it through the radiator. I've seen this before. Don't put it around the gas and brake pedals, or clutch pedal if you have a manual. And again, airbag deployment zones. Run individual wires in loom, which is it's this black tubing. It's usually black. It can come in other colors. But it's basically a tube with a slit in it, and you put it around the wire, and it protects the wire. And if you drill a hole through your firewall, or you go through the firewall boop, seal up around it with silicone or some duct seal or some kind of sealing material. And that's a picture of part of my wiring. As you can see, the wiring I put in loom comes out from the firewall and goes along with the factory harness. And my foreman likes to say, the best way to do wiring is the lay person should not be able to tell if it's factory or added after the fact.